Hey fam, welcome back! In this video, I thought it would be fun to pull out a large number of eyeshadow palettes that are inspiring me for spring. I think we all love eyeshadow palettes and they're fun to look at, and I've really been trying to be more inspired by what I currently have in my collection and to encourage you guys to do the same. So if you love looking at eyeshadow palettes and you're looking for some spring inspiration, go ahead and stay tuned. We're going to get into it right now. Spring is a time of rebirth. The weather starts to get warmer, the sun stays out much longer, plants start to come back to life, and flowers start to bloom. I personally cannot wait to get outside after being cooped up all winter. This year I'm finding myself inspired by the idea of freshness, naturalness, and earthiness. I still think pastels are beautiful, and is it even really spring without pastels? But I'm also really drawn to earthy, fresh, dare I say veggie tones? So I've selected a number of palettes to share with you, and I hope that this inspires you to get into the spring spirit and to draw from your own collection to curate a season of beautiful colors to play with that inspire you too. So for this video, I chose 5 categories: pastels, shades of spring flowers, natural earthy veggie tones, all the neutral ladies, and a 5th wildcard category. Also, if you're more of a neutral gal, don't be afraid to play with a pop of pastel in the inner corner or even along the lower lash line. This can be an easy and comfortable way to incorporate spring tones without committing to a fully colorful look. So let's get started. I thought we would begin today with the pastel category, and I just want to state the purpose of this video is essentially to provide you with some inspiration as well as to show you examples of spring themes that are inspiring me right now. I would encourage you though to look through your own collection and find what inspires you, as well as if you already own any of these palettes, it might be a fun time to pull them out. So starting with the pastel category, the first one I have is from Bella. This is the Life in Pastel Shadow Palette. What I really like about this palette is that this is one of the more affordable eyeshadow palettes I'm going to have in today's video. I also really like that even though this is pastel themed, there are some deeper shades. The tricky thing with pastels is that they are lighter shades, so sometimes they can look a little bit ashy. It just makes this palette a lot more diverse. The next pastel palette is the Pastel Pup from Menagerie. I have altered my palette. Saddleback and Whisker are actually a white matte and a black matte in the traditional palette. However, I did purchase these 2 shimmers from Menagerie Cosmetics. This is Turtle Cove, and this one is Bunny, I think, because I wanted more shimmers in this palette. And it's one that I love pulling out for spring. The next palette is the Nomad Tokyo Harajuku palette. I love that Nomad themes their palettes after the places that they've traveled. I think that makes the company really unique and the palette's really unique. This one does have a row of mattes, a row of satins, and then a row of shimmers. And I think the theme is really cute. It's definitely a palette that gave me a lot of spring feels. Another pastel palette is this one from Give Me Glow. This is the Pastel Dreams palette. This one is really nice because you have a pastel matte and a corresponding pastel shimmer for every shade. Give Me Glow has a wonderful formula. They're an indie brand. And if you're looking for a pastel palette, this is probably the one that I would recommend. While I do love the Pastel Pup palette, this one does just give you a bit more options in terms of shimmers. And then if you're looking for deeper pastels, I think the GlamLite Michaela palette could be a great option. I like that the tones in this palette are not as light as the other pastel palettes, but they're also not as bright and colorful as I would consider a summer palette to be. So if lighter pastels don't work for you, but you still want to play with spring colors, I think this could be a great option. And then last but certainly not least is the GlamLite Ice Cream Dream palette. This is what I'm wearing on my eyes today, but I played with some of the more neutral tones, and that's what I love about this palette too. It's a beautiful palette for spring. You've got a lot of great pastel options and also some deeper mid-tone shades that you can enhance the pastels with, but you also have some neutral options that would allow you to get more use out of this throughout the year. Our next category is shades of spring flowers. I think that's another really pretty theme to think about this spring. The first palette I have to show you is the Nabla Coral Cutie palette. This is not my favorite cutie palette, but it is a beautiful one. And I love how these shades just make me think about tulips. They make me think about new blooms for spring. It's a beautiful color story, and I think that this palette could create a beautiful spring look. The next one is the Nabla Wild Berries Cutie palette. And while this one is a little bit deeper and richer, I still think it has that same sort of beautiful spring feel, just very floral. Even though it's a berry theme, I think you could make some exquisite looks with this palette. Next, we have the Kaleidos Flower Punk palette. And this one is just so vibrant and beautiful. It's very like crisp and fresh. but gives you a lot of variety. You can make a very cute look, but you could also go a little bit grungier. This one definitely reminded me of spring flowers, and it definitely makes sense with the theme of the palette. The next one I have for you is the Natasha Denona Love palette. This one also has very pretty pinks and purples, which definitely make me think about spring. You have some fun textures, beautiful colors. She's an oldie but a goodie, and I think that this is the perfect time to pull her out. The next one I have for you is the Barry Royal palette from Clarity Cosmetics. This palette has some gorgeous shades that make me think about flowers. It's got fun pops of color. You could definitely do a beautiful subtle look with this, as well as a much more vibrant, colorful look. And I think there's just something so floral and pretty about this palette. Next we have the Vintage Rose palette from Give Me Glow. And I think there is no denying that this is just spring in a palette. You could definitely do a more neutral or colorful look with this palette, but I think overall it just makes me think about being outside. These are like the colors of nature, the colors of spring, and I think this would be a beautiful palette for this time of year. We also have the Vivid Rose palette from Give Me Glow. I wore this in my previous video, and this definitely gives me spring inspiration, all these pinks and purples. Again, even though it's colorful, it's got these softer shades that definitely make me think about flowers. It's a rose themed palette, and I think that this is a beautiful color story for spring. Next we have the Pat McGrath Labs Mothership Mega Celestial Divinity palette. This was her holiday palette from 2020, and I definitely get such spring vibes from this. I could completely see like a little garden full of these shades. You can definitely go lighter or deeper with this palette, which I love. And again, with the pinks and purples, I just think this is perfect for this time of year. And lastly, for the Shades of Spring Flowers category, we have the Pat McGrath Labs Mothership Mega Celestial Odyssey palette. I don't think this one is as spring themed as the previous Celestial Divinity palette, but I do still think it fits the theme. This one you could go a lot more neutral if you enjoy that, but there's still pretty pops of green and blue and pink and orange and yellow that definitely remind me of the beautiful flowers we see blooming this time of year. So while the first two categories are, I think, themes that we would expect to associate with spring, I think these next three categories are a lot more interesting. And this would be the natural, earthy, kind of like veggie garden theme that I said was really inspiring me, kind of like the Wild Greens palette from Urban Decay. And I really love these like earthy, natural tones. I think they're really fresh and different for spring, like to think about spring in a different way. The first one I have is Gemini from Melt Cosmetics. And while I would have normally considered this more of a fall theme palette, I love how fresh and green this is. I just think about like this natural, getting back outside, earthy tones. And my mind immediately went to this palette. If you're not about the purples and pinks, I think that this could be another fun way to express yourself in spring. Just getting back outside into nature, things are warming back up and growing, and I just think this is so beautiful. Just a nod to the outdoors. And I feel the same way about the Juicy Olive palette from Give Me Glow. I wouldn't have normally thought all these beautiful greens for spring, but I'm just so inspired right now by the outdoors, the weather warming up, this idea of freshness, of growth, life, and I think this palette is so, so pretty. Similarly, the Feral palette gives me that outdoor feel, but we also have those pinks and purples that make me think about spring. This beautiful green shimmer just looks like fresh grass. The sun in this beautiful bright matte yellow. I think this could be such a beautiful palette for this time of year. Also the Natasha Denona Zendo palette. This one I thought really kind of surprised me for spring. I wouldn't have thought of it originally, but I just love this idea of these greens and oranges and earthy tones. This palette just seems so fresh to me, but still pastel and peachy. And I think if you have this palette and maybe you haven't pulled it out yet, this could be a good time to play with it. Next I have the Ace Beauté Flare palette, and this one was a bit of a stretch because honestly this one's a little bit more summery I think than some of the other palettes, but again, I love these earthy tones. I love these oranges and greens mixed, these bright, beautiful shades, the sky blue shimmer. Even some of the purples that we have in here remind me of flowers, and I think this could be such a beautiful palette. It's a little bit bolder. It's a warmer, richer take, but still very earth tone and very pretty. I definitely felt very inspired by this palette. And last but certainly not least, we have the Tiny Marvels palette from Mel Thompson, who very sadly passed away in 2021. And this was her collaboration with Sydney Grace. I think this palette is so beautiful. Thinking of all the tiny insects that start to come out to play their part in our ecosystem, pollinating flowers and other plants. It gives me garden tones. We have some pastel shades, some colorful shades, but also really beautiful neutrals, beautiful shimmers. Plus it's so beautiful to be reminded of Mel. This next category I am calling all the neutral ladies, because I know I am talking a lot about color, and I wanted to have an entire little category devoted to y'all that love wearing neutrals and don't switch it up with color too much, but I still felt like these neutral palettes definitely said spring to me. The first one I have is the Huda Beauty Nude Light palette, and while this is advertised as a nude palette or a neutral palette, I see all these pinks and purples, Even the brown in here is more cool toned. It just plays really beautifully with this light, I think very springy neutral palette. I also have the nude medium from Huda Beauty. Again, we have these rosy tones, a little bit of purple in this shimmer. And this could be an approachable way to be inspired for spring. Instead of going for like your more beige neutrals, to go for the more rosy neutrals. And I think this could be a fun way to celebrate the season. Of course, we have the Huda Beauty Nude Rich palette, again with these beautiful rosy tones. Even this deepest matte has a lot of purple. These shades also give me that sort of flower feel, but in a more approachable, less colorful way. The Norvina palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills is another neutral palette, but it also has, to me, a spring feel with these light pink and purple shimmers and light pink and periwinkle mattes. But you also have a lot of neutral options in this palette. I'm sure a lot of us have this one. And in case you haven't pulled this one out in a while, I think now could be a perfect time. This palette has been so much fun to work with. I really enjoy playing with it every time I've pulled it out. And I think this would be a lovely palette to play with for the spring season. For a few more from Huda, we have the Mercury Retrograde. Now this one is the most colorful of the ones I picked out for my neutral lovers. However, this palette is predominantly neutral. There are a couple pops of color, which again, I think you can play with in fun ways. You don't have to do a full colorful look. You can always play with a little bit of color in the inner corner or lower lash line, or this beautiful duochrome shimmer with like a nude matte. I think if you love neutral shades, and maybe you're not as into color, this one could still be a really fun palette to play with this time of year. And my last one in this category is the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. Again, this one does have some color with the pinks and purples. However, this is predominantly neutral. While some shades are colorful, they are softer colors, maybe more approachable for someone that loves neutral shades. I think this could be a beautiful palette to play with in the spring or any time of year. This last category I'm calling the Wildcard category because I think these palettes are ones that you may not even think about for spring, especially with the theming. I think that they lend themselves more to Halloween. However, if we just look at the color stories, I think we can find some really beautiful spring themes within these palettes. So starting with the Beaut Be Now Baddie B&X Shroud Cosmetics, the It's Freaking Bats eyeshadow palette. These shades are so beautiful. This gorgeous chartreuse green and the bright periwinkle purple I think would be lovely this time of year. You've got these beautiful shimmers to play with. I think even incorporating some of the darker tones, the darker teal, the darker purple, just gives you more options to play with if you wanted to do something a little bit more grungy or sultry. But I think this color story is so pretty and I think it could be gorgeous in spring as well as during the spooky season. And similarly, Moonspell from Lunar Beauty, while it might have that spooky theme, if we just look at the color story, I think this absolutely would be a beautiful palette to play with in spring. We've got some lovely purples, greens, also some neutral options, soft pastels. This palette definitely does not need to be reserved just for the spooky season. I think this one could be absolutely beautiful this time of year. So I hope that you guys enjoyed seeing all the beautiful palettes that are inspiring me this season. I hope it gave you guys some inspiration for palettes or color stories that you can look for within your own collection. I'd love to hear what's inspiring you this spring. I thank you all so much for being here with me today. I love you all so much, and until the next video, bye-bye.